now. So, the employed bar event, we're hoping we're going to shed some light on what life is like at the employed bar as opposed to the more common self-employed bar, practicing in chambers. And we're going to go through our speakers' personal experiences, their day-to-day activities, what career progression is like at the employed bar, and then the pros and cons of being employed. So with us, we've got Susanna McGibbon and Marc Jones. And to start off with, if we could have a brief introduction from you both, that would be great. Marc, if we could start with you.
Oh, junior guy first, okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Delighted to be here. I'm Marc Jones. I'm an officer in the Royal Navy, and I'm also an employed barrister. My background is pretty mundane. As you can tell from the thick accent, I'm a Geordie. I was born and bred in the Northeast. Did my law degree, didn't know what I wanted to do, so then did my, what was then BVC, now BPTC, with a scholarship from Middle Temple. Then I was very lucky to be recruited into the Royal Navy. My job in the Royal Navy, we primarily deal with three types of law. We deal with discipline, so criminal law, deal with employment law, and we deal with international law with an operational focus. My job at the moment is that I lead a team of 6 barristers, and we provide discipline advice across the Royal Navy, which is about 30,000 people. So that's it from me, and no doubt we'll come on to what I do on a day-to-day basis later on. Susanna, over to you.
Thanks very much. And yes, just briefly, a bit of really ancient history. I was called to the bar in 1990 and have been at the employed bar since 1993, which was when I joined the civil service or government legal service at the Foreign Office originally, and I've been in various government departments since then, including the MOD, where Marc and I will have not actually overlapped, but we will have some issues in common. But my background, state educated in Bolton, in Greater Manchester, used to be famous for its football team, now famous for its very high levels of COVID, sadly. I did law at university, at Sheffield University actually, and then came to do my bar finals in London, which in those days was the only place you could do bar finals, interestingly. But I was always motivated early on to be a barrister. Although there were no lawyers in the family, so I don't quite know where I got the idea from. Maybe off the telly, probably, thinking there was some glamorous lifestyle that was just around the corner. Yeah, so fully expected to be spending my career at the self-employed bar, knocking around the courts, particularly enjoyed public speaking and advocacy and all of that, but didn't quite get the tenancy that I wanted to. And after 3 years squatting, building up lots of debt, I thought I really needed to get a proper job. So quite by accident, I ended up in the civil service. It wasn't a great planned affair. I was applying for every job in the paper I was vaguely qualified to do. And going through the process, and it's quite an elaborate process to join the civil service, perhaps even more so then, actually. And I just basically took the view, if I keep getting to the next stage, we might actually suit each other. So no grand ambition, no grand insight into what I was letting myself in for. But once I was through the door, my goodness, I really felt I found a niche. Instantly felt I was in a fascinating environment, surrounded by great colleagues, and immediately felt part of a team. And, you know, I think that team element, it will come up during our conversation, because that is a very strong element of being at the employed bar in my experience. So that's my background. I'm now responsible for, I'm one of 3 directors general at the government legal department. So I've got a portfolio of government departments that I'm responsible for their in-house legal teams, and I'm also responsible for our commercial law function which advises on commercial law across the whole of government. So quite a big command in military terms as these days. And we're very committed to having a diverse organisation, doing fascinating work, outstanding legal work, but also a great place to work as well. So we try to get that balance right. And I'm sure that'll come up in our conversations.
Thank you for that. So to start with, I think it'd be helpful if we ran through what your day-to-day activities were as an employed barrister. And Susanna, if we can run back to you first.
Yeah, so I mean, it's probably helpful if I think back to days as a junior lawyer and day-to-day activity in different departments. So in some departments that I worked in, my role would have a very heavy legislative focus. So that would be turning the policies of government into law that then gets onto the statute book. Now, sometimes that's done by way of primary legislation. And you work, I mentioned the team, you work very closely with policy colleagues who are helping to develop the more detailed implementation of manifesto commitments. So, for example, if there is a manifesto commitment to reintroduce grammar schools, then there's quite a lot of law around that and quite a lot of detailed policy development that's needed before it ever becomes law. So you work in a team, working out all the implications, working out what the current powers the government have to do this are, and then work out whether you need additional powers to be put into legislation. As I say, sometimes that's primary legislation where we instruct parliamentary counsel, so expert drafters, or sometimes if it's regulations, you'll have heard loads about regulations in relation to COVID, and I've got teams working through the night drafting those regulations. So some of those are done by the government lawyers at the coalface, if you like, busy trying to reflect the restrictions that the ministers want to see imposed on our fellow citizens in a legally coherent and robust way. We do our best in very difficult circumstances. But yes, so some days can be drafting legislation, some days could be advising ministers, some days could be spending quite a lot of time doing research on the most recent developments on freedom of expression under the European Convention of Human Rights, for example. So very, very varied. So it's quite difficult to describe a typical day.
Perfect, thank you. Marc, how about you?
I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to quote my entire office, actually, and I'm going to pick today. So I have a team of 6 lawyers, and I've just totted up what they're all doing, actually. So the Navy, the way the military organise their legal services is we're a bit like in-house counsel. It's probably the best analogy I can use for you guys. We're very similar, and a lot of what Susanna was saying, I recognise, because I'm the guy further down the pipeline who's got to implement the advice from our government legal department colleagues. But a lot of it is very, very in-house. You're the random lawyer who's there, and some mad chief executive, I would call him a senior officer, comes in with, right, today I want to change our uniform, I want to bring back this, and so we have to advise on it. And if we are up to Susanna or her colleagues, we will, or other government departments. If we need to refer to the Army or the Air Force or NATO or the EU for the next few months, we do. So just to pick I run a team of 3 offices, one in Portsmouth, one in Plymouth, one in Scotland for our submarine deterrent. So the guy in Plymouth today was doing defence work. So we in the Navy defend a court-martial. So we have our own little jurisdiction where we can try offences under the UK criminal code. We have our own offences. So in the military, I'm afraid if you're late, we take the right that we will prosecute you, and we can go up to effectively a Crown Court level hearing for someone being late or not wanting to go to sea. So it's a hard life. So my colleague in the West Country, the senior lawyer there, he was currently defending a serious sexual assault. So he was doing a remote conference with our court martial centre that's in Wiltshire. His junior guy, he was working from home. He was advising on an internal investigation, so nothing criminal, just a fact-finding exercise into a security breach. So we managed to lose some rather sensitive information. He's providing advice to the team that is investigating that and to the next line of inquiry. My colleague up in Scotland, Josh, he is doing the post exercise. So we've just had a major exercise with our new aircraft carrier. Sorry, I had to mention it. Our NATO and allied colleagues testing how this works. Lots of international legal issues. So the aircraft carrier had American and British aircraft on it. Can we order the American aircraft to do stuff that we can't do, for example, weapon systems? So he's currently doing the pace exercise feedback on that. My two colleagues in the south, well, one of them's in the Mediterranean, lucky guy. So he's on HMS Albion, which is our Royal Marine carrier, effectively putting troops ashore. So he's advising on international legal issues there. My colleague Ed, he's triaging, so he's doing COVID, because we had a captain go slightly mad yesterday and decide to ban all of his sailors from public transport, seemingly anywhere in the world. Now, Susanna's probably grimacing. We have taken our government's advice, and we will deal with him. But that was a busy day for him. As for me, I spent the morning training. That's a big element of my role, is training the Navy into the law that applies to them. So I spent the morning training the Navy's HR advisors on employment law matters. So think protected characteristics, what they, the decisions, things they need to take into account when they're making decisions. And then this afternoon, I had a meeting with the Army and the Air Force about the requirements, the things that we're required to do as a military when we're sending people overseas, because obviously COVID requirements vary across the world. And so it was just a meeting to make sure that we as a military are united when we're sending people overseas. So quite a busy day. That's just 6 lawyers, all of them barristers at the employed bar, all of them probably losing their hairlines and their waistlines expand as this madness goes on. But yeah, so I hope that's at least insightful as to kind of stuff that me and my team deal with.
Oh yeah, definitely. On your side, Mark, it seems like your team have quite a bit of oral advocacy, as you'd see with the self-employed bar there. And I was just wondering how it was for both of you, like both yourselves and your teams. How much advocacy do you get in comparison to the self-employed bar as well?
Can I jump in, because mine's probably quite quick. So we all have to be trained advocates at the criminal bar. So we all arrive having done, and if you haven't got a pupillage from a criminal set, normally London, but we are, like most of the legal sector, diversifying. So we're all trained at the criminal bar, and you can do. You will prosecute at some point. We have our own prosecution service. Basically, everything in the civilian world, we have our own. Oh, question from Natalia Khan to everyone. So I specialise in operational law, with a bit of criminal law and a bit of employment law alongside. And I hope that answers your question. So we do prosecution. We have our own version of the CPS, and we also defend. The Army and the Air Force don't defend, but they prosecute. The Navy, we do both. So in the Navy, we will do criminal advocacy, but that's a third of my job. The other, the second third is advising on military law. The final third is advising on employment law, in the same way that a counsel in a FTSE 100 company would. So I hope that answers your question from my perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, very different in the government legal department, in that obviously we are public lawyers, not involved in the criminal law at all. I personally haven't done any courtroom advocacy since I left the self-employed bar, but what we do have some opportunities within the government legal department now. We do have a small advocacy unit in our litigation department, where litigation colleagues do advocacy in the first tier tribunals. I'm trying to think whether and in the upper tier tribunals. As yet, I'm not convinced. I'm not sure we've seen any High Court advocacy done by in-house counsel. Whether that will come in due course, I'm not entirely sure. But I always say, don't come to GLD or the government legal profession for courtroom advocacy. However, we all deploy our advocacy training and our skills on a daily basis, trying to persuade ministers to listen to our advice, trying to persuade our colleagues of the helpfulness of our advice, and also we do, of course, in our written advocacy and our written correspondence with people in our contentious areas, then we draw on those written advocacy skills. So less courtroom advocacy, but we do have a big litigation group that do contentious work, as well as that advisory work I briefly described in relation to legislation and so forth.
Yeah, thank you for that. So what was it to initially start with that drew you to the employed bar as opposed to the self-employed? Susanna, I know you mentioned that it was the having that gap and then moving to the employed bar, just needing a job, but was there anything else in particular that drew you towards it?
Not particularly. One of the things I quite liked by being able to join the government legal service was that I could stay a barrister, because I was quite proud of becoming a barrister, and I don't want to denigrate our lovely solicitor colleagues, but I didn't really think. I mean, I did apply for a few solicitors firms, but actually, I think the ability to retain the profession that I started off in, albeit in a slightly sort of morphed way, was something that appealed to me rather than joining a solicitor's firm. And with hindsight, I don't regret for a moment the move, because I very quickly realised that the level of responsibility I was given early on, which suited someone from the bar, frankly, because as a self-employed barrister, you have to run your own practice, you have to take responsibility for your advice, and I don't think you get that level of autonomy in a solicitor's firm, but in the government legal department you absolutely do, and in the across different government departments. So I immediately felt I was trusted to do more interesting work, take responsibility for it myself, than actually and a much wider range of interesting work than I had seen elsewhere. So I think that sort of mix of autonomy suited someone with a bar background, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Marc, what about you?
So I didn't intend to do BPTC automatically. I toyed with the LPC. Sisters, they need love too. I've got to admit, I fell in love with Middle Temple. So I was umming and ahhing as to what I wanted to do. I was very lucky that my dad occasionally worked in London, so took me down. I got a tour of Middle Temple, and then my uni had very good links with both the self-employed and employed bar in the Northeast. And Middle Temple just said, come with us, and we'll knock £5,000 off the fee. Thank you very much. And then when I was doing my BPTC, I genuinely didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I liked talking, you probably gathered that, and I knew I liked probably a bit like the GLD. It wasn't that I joined, I desperately wanted to join the employed or the self-employed bar. I just really liked what the Navy wanted me to do. And, and I know people who work for the GLD, and they all, the passion that they have for helping ministers enact their decisions. I felt the same way about the Navy. I really liked the sort of work I would be doing. It wasn't necessarily I was desperate for paid leave or a salary, rather than the slightly more hit or miss experience at the self-employed bar. I just really, it was more who I wanted to work with, rather than I desperately didn't want to wear a wig and gown, or I desperately did want to wear a funny uniform in the military. So it was more the type of work that that was being offered to me as a naval lawyer that attracted me. And then obviously there are advantages to being at the employed bar, which we may discuss this evening.
Yeah.
Self-employed bar that were just more nice to have. So, you know, I really wanted to do, you know, to take part in what the military was doing kind of 10, 15 years ago. That drew me in. I would completely go along with Susanna's point. You know, as a fairly junior officer, and a Navy guy, so I thought it was all ships. None of this war stuff, nothing threatening, you know, absolutely fine. And then, you know, 2 months later, I'm in Afghanistan, having to wear a helmet and carry a rifle. Pretty terrifying. I mean, I went nowhere near the war zone, but immediately I'm out. You know, my first day, David Cameron flew out and asked myself and the civil servant policy advisor for a brief on rules of engagement. And there's me, you know, a gobby 20-odd-year-old Geordie in the Prime Minister of the UK on what his troops were doing. And it's that, and you know, and Susanna will tell stories of GLD guys who advise ministers on this first or second day. You're thrown straight into it, and you know, if you're not an expert, you soon become one. And I find that really attractive, actually, as a pretty junior barrister to be doing that. That's quite, you know, the reward I got from that was quite substantial.
Okay, so let's run with what you said there about benefits. Like, what do you think the key benefits are of the employed bar?
For me, I'll jump in if I may. I love the teamwork. I love the sense that I have a team. There's me and 5 other lawyers. We're not, you know, that we talk. We're quite proud in the Navy that we have a chambers ethos, but actually, I think it's closer than that. You know, we're not in competition. We do look out for one another. We regularly, you know, we'll club together for big projects in the way that the GLD probably does. So for me, that the sense of teamwork is front and center. The advantage of the employed bar. Yes, we're salaried. Susanna and I are both on a salary. Yes, we both get a not unattractive government pension, especially in these days. The paid holiday is quite fun as well. I've got to say, though, for me, it's the work that I do. You know, there aren't any military lawyers in self-employed practice because there just aren't. And the sense of teamwork that I've always had in the military, especially when you're the only lawyer, actually, that's quite nice. If you're parachuted into a project and you're there, and it doesn't matter whether it's a really senior guy or a really junior guy, you're there to provide their legal advice. I've always found that really rewarding. And you know, I look forward to hearing what Susanna says about it. So.
Yeah, very, very similar. That teamwork, working in a multidisciplinary team is quite, is very rewarding. So yes, we do technically call some of our colleagues, our policy colleagues, clients, but that's not a word I'm terribly keen on. I much prefer that we are working together as a team with policy experts, with analytical experts, with economists, all working together to find a solution for a legal way and an effective way and of implementing ministerial wishes. So there's a sense of purpose in serving the government that is really important. Sense of purpose in serving our fellow citizens. I don't want to make it sound too sort of Good Samaritan-ish, but you know, that's quite important to me, that actually that we are not just serving the government of the day, which is important, but actually it's in order to, you know, our democratic society demands decent lawyers, decent policy people supporting the people that we vote into power. So there is that bigger picture for me that is quite important. And then in addition to that teamwork, one of the reasons that teamwork is so rewarding is almost without exception, we are surrounded by lovely people. And that may sound a bit sort of feely softy, but actually it tends to be true, and was really noticeable to me when I was a junior lawyer and loads of my friends were in private practice, both at the bar and in the city. And the commitment of my managers to my personal development, the commitment of that teamwork. Like Marc says, you know, we're not in competition, although technically we are in competition for the next promotion, but it never feels like that. We don't have this sort of principle that knowledge is power. We don't hang on to our knowledge. There's a really sharing, collaborative approach to everything that we do. And that was really noticeable to me as a junior lawyer. And I sometimes forget now and take that for granted because it is such a way of, but that is a distinguisher for me compared to my pals who were in private practice, you know, 20 years ago. So that is, you know, several reasons why it has been such a rewarding experience.
I'll just jump in, if I may, with one observation. You've both got two very public sector types here. You know, I'm in the military, which is public sector as it gets, unless you're a mercenary. And Susanna, obviously, you know, is working for our government. But the feedback I've had from friends who've gone into industry as employed barristers is very similar as well, particularly when you're that multidisciplinary thing, especially when you're the one lawyer who's plugged in to a, you know, whether it's an office move or a, you know, you're floating on the stock exchange or something, and you're the general counsel. It is very different. You know, with the self-employed bar, there are advantages. You know, independence, absolutely. The ability to plan, you know, the ability to say, I'm not working that day to your clerks. You might get some pressure from the clerks, you might not, depends on what the chambers is like. But the team ethos and the teamwork has all, you know, everyone I've spoken to at the employed bar, including the GLD, including the military, including the private sector, have all said that teamwork is the key benefit. I think I just throw that in because you've got two very public sector focused figures here. So
yeah, but I guess that shared sense of purpose, as you say, Marc, applies with any employed environment. So
I think so.
You know, the trying to fulfil the strategy of the company or the charity or the NGO or whatever it might be. It's that. And it's a sense of purpose that goes beyond the immediate legal issue that you're dealing with. So, you know, inevitably at the self-employed bar, it's case by case and you're doing work for different clients. And that variety is part of the joy of the self-employed bar, that you get different clients every day. And but a shared sense of purpose in a company or an NGO it goes beyond the current case and gives you a bit more strategic influence in how the organisation responds to the legal issues that it comes across. So there's a different dimension to it as well. You're not just dealing with the legal issues of the day, you're anticipating what the legal issues of tomorrow and next year are.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that. You both mentioned how there wasn't like competition between you and your colleagues and there was like a commitment to personal development. So I was wondering what the career progression was like in both your areas and whether it was similar to the self-employed bar, how they go for QC, or whether it was more you move up within the ranks of your area. So if you could explain that one. Susanna, if you want to go first on that one.
Yeah, sure. The civil service, a bit like the military, is quite graded. I use the word graded rather than gradist because we're trying to be less gradist and just use the grade as a sort of peg to give a bit of indication as to where you are in your career. But we certainly try to diminish the sense of hierarchy in the way we behave towards each other. But as a junior lawyer, compared to the rest of the civil service, lawyers start quite senior because of the professional skills that they bring. I mean, I won't bore you with the detailed grades, but basically, you start as a junior lawyer with no management responsibility. That would be your first role. And you might do one or two roles at that level. And then you might apply for a promotion exercise, which would involve some management and supervision of a colleague, a small mini team of, you know, anything between 3 and 6, I would imagine. I mean, it's not exact everywhere. And then you probably do 2 or 3 roles at that level, and then think about, if you're really interested in leadership and management, in addition to your legal expertise, then you might think of applying to join the senior civil service. And then there are different levels within the senior civil service. Senior civil service is probably about partner level, junior partner level in a solicitor's firm. And then, but you know, we don't have that sort of application for silk business. Eventually, some Treasury solicitors get awarded honorary silks, but that is very much towards the end of one's career, and it makes no difference on the sort of work that you do. So so that's the way that the career progression works, and we're very keen to ensure that progression, or at least the development of expertise, isn't always a matter of onwards and upwards. It could be much more lateral moving in and acquiring different levels of experience in different areas, or getting a real deep specialism in an area when actually you're not that interested in the leadership and management side, in which case, fine, we need coalface lawyers and experienced coalface lawyers the whole time. As you become more senior, your strategic legal input increases, but the day-to-day detail is done by members of the team. So quite structured, and it really depends on the extent to which you want to develop your leadership skills to run the organisation and to support others, or whether you're more interested in the day-to-day detailed work.
Thank you. And Mark, what about you?
Right, here you found my Achilles heel, Holly. So the wry smile begins, because I probably belong to the most hierarchical, rank obsessed, and Susanna's already nodding vigorously because she's worked in the MOD. So I belong to the most hierarchical, rank-based organisation probably in the world, because it's the Royal Navy and it's one of the oldest, blah, 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 blah. So there's a joke in the military that we're always about 5, and please, Susanna, don't repeat this to your colleagues. There's a joke in the military that we have to accept that we're about 5 years behind the civil service on most things, including the law, sadly. And yeah, there you go. When you advise somebody, you had it. What were you, colonel? Commander?
Back in those days, I was a colonel. Yeah.
Ah, mom.
Now I'd be something like I think a 2-star general.
Yeah.
Or 3-star or 3-star. Yeah. I can't remember.
So very, very, very senior. So basically, if Susanna had an honorary rank, I'd have to call her mom. I'd have to salute her, and it's all very rank conscious. Now, there are times where that matters. There are times when it doesn't. And the one thing that the Navy's doing at the moment is going through a massive period of transformation to work out all that lateral kind of perspective that Susanna's talking about. But we're a few years behind. So we are absolutely, it's like a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta about ranking who we all are, and it has its advantages, but it has its disadvantages. But I can talk about it with some authority, because guess what? I've lived it for 15 years. So you join at the bottom. We will expose you to the 3 types of law that we do, and you will move around. So you'll do some time prosecuting, you'll do some time working for me in the regional legal office, you'll deploy overseas if we've got an operation running. And the idea is that you get a bit of grounding in the 3 big areas that we work in. We might send you up to town to work on the Armed Forces Act team, because we're constantly changing our kind of overarching legislation. Then we'll promote you. We'll send you on a broadening job, so you might go work for a senior officer for a bit in a more generalist kind of policy advisory role. We might bring you back. And then when you get to my age, so that's kind of the stage I'm at. If I was to stay in the military, I would contemplate doing a master's. So we do that. The development side of it in the military is actually quite cool. So if you're in the Army or the Air Force and you're a solicitor and you haven't got rights of audience, and you go to the prosecuting authority, they will pay for you to go and do that time. If you want to do a secondment with the CPS or a TSOL, we send people back into the GLD to get kind of that cross-governmental piece. So, you know, when they're standing there at a flood and there's had something called military assistance to the civil authority, MACA, we hate it because we don't really understand it. It's just they ring us and go, can we have some troops? Yes. Can we have them back eventually? So we're trying to get lawyers involved with that so that when the GLD make that request, because there are 3 different ways that they can do it, that they understand what the civil service demand is going to be like, or you can go and do a master's. And so that side of it is quite good, but it is always pegged to rank. Now, we've got a new kind of second in commander that say, I'm off again. We've got a new second in commander of the Navy who's looking to change that. The silk side and the partner side, that kind of analogy is exactly as Susanna's described it. People will get things like that, but it's almost a sinecure at the end of their career as a mark of it. And at that sort of level, it wouldn't make a difference because you would be the Navy senior legal advisor, and you would be, you know, when the head of the Navy has a phone call, has a problem, you'd be advising, or you'd be going to the MOD or the FCO. So exactly the same with that kind of senior recognition piece as to what Susanna has described. Unfortunately, before that, we've got a lot of saluting. There's a lot of, I mean, I've got about 5 different types of ridiculous uniform, and it's, you know, I had a wig and gown from my BBTC days, and then I joined the military, and I've got a whole load of kind of hornblower-esque things I have to wear as well. So that's the side of the military that is very conservative, and maybe we'll come on to that later on, I think. But it's probably it's probably where our recruiting block is actually. I think the GLD is probably more inclusive than we are. You know, we're good in some areas, but the fact that you have to wear a uniform, and you know, I have to do a running test every year without collapsing. The army have to go shooting. Army lawyers have to shoot. Why on earth an army lawyer has to do a shooting test is beyond me. But they do, and so that's kind of that's the bit of the military that you've just got to get. You've either got to take to it or you don't. And I think the GLD probably edges me on that one. There we are.
Oh, thank you for that. I think it might be good to now move into a bit more how students can branch into getting into the employed bar. And I was wondering to start with whether both your areas offer work experience like mini pupillages, or like can students actually get involved before qualifying? Susanna, if you want to discuss the GLD first.
Yes, sure. And partly because of that very inclusive approach that we are committed to, we don't, for example, have personal arrangements whereby we can offer mini pupillages just because you happen to bump into somebody at a family event or anything like that. So what we do have are internships and vacation schemes that are open. Particularly, I think the most recent one we ran was very much focused on people from different backgrounds, non-traditional backgrounds. But the best thing to do is to keep an eye on the GLD website, particularly during the summer vacation, to see what the sort of the theme of this year's summer vacation scheme is. This year we did it all online, obviously, which meant we were able to have lots more people joining us, and that was really great. And I certainly did a couple of sessions with them to talk about life in the GLD. So as I say, we're not able to fix up personal arrangements for those very diverse reasons, but when we run a scheme, then they're open to all. So as I said, keep an eye on that. We run as well, I mean, most people, you know, for example, you know, I would be happy to have a personal chat with somebody, but I wouldn't be able to invite someone in to do work shadowing with me in that sense. Our HR colleagues would be able to provide lots of useful information to people, and you know, keep an eye out for events like this where one or other of us will be speaking quite regularly. Next stage on, we run a trainee scheme across GLD, but also beyond GLD into other government departments that aren't currently in GLD. So including HMRC, for example, and some other sort of curious places like the Competition and Markets Authority. But they're all part of our trainee scheme. And that is trainee solicitors and pupil barristers. And so we're very keen to maintain our links with both sides of the profession. And so our pupil barristers will do 6 months within GLD and 6 months within chambers. And we fix up secondments to chambers in order to give our pupils a taste of what it's like at the self-employed bar, but with the hope and very knowledge that they're going to spend the rest of their career, well, or at least the first beginning of their career with us. So the pupillage fair last week, it was last week, I think, wasn't it? The GLD was well represented, I understand. I wasn't there myself, but so we maintain those links with the profession to provide those opportunities. So that's it, I think, from me.
Thank you. Mark?
So we're a lot smaller than our GLD colleagues. There's only 40 naval barristers in total. So there's the official route, and then there's the unofficial route, and this is actually the latter. So the official route is every university town will have an Armed Forces Careers Office. They're a mixed bag, and if they're recording, I love you very dearly, but they are a mixed bag because the chances of there being a lawyer in that office are pretty small. They might have a doctor, they might have a professionally qualified guy or girl there, but they won't be a lawyer there. So they may or may not get it when you go and you go, right, I want to be a solicitor in the Army or a barrister in the Navy or something in the Royal Air Force. They just might not get it. And so for that reason, and probably because we are a lot smaller than the GLD, we do one-to-ones. Now, there are two schools of thought. One school is, hang on a second, you're a middle-aged, middle-class guy living in Portsmouth, you're white, you're male, you're heterosexual, you're pretty well represented in the armed forces, actually. And that is something I'm very keen on. And I'm delighted by the backgrounds of the guys on this webinar, because that's one thing the Navy needs to improve on. So officially, the AFCOs, the Armed Forces Careers Officers, will try and spot talent and try and encourage them, and will arrange secondments if you press them hard enough. The Navy's the more difficult one, because there are several good reasons why I can't put you on HMS Queen Elizabeth at sea, but we can try and get you a tour of a pretty grey thing in a dockyard. We do they're called potential officer candidates, POCs, and all three services do them, regardless of whether you want to be a tank driver or a pilot or a doctor or a barrister or whatever. So that's the official side of it. Unofficially, if you stalk me on LinkedIn, and you all have, well done, Sophie, we will try and facilitate. I would always legitimize that, though, by contacting my boss and just saying, sir, because remember, we're in the military, I'm going to do this for a week. And I have done that in the past. I've done it when I was prosecuting. So I did in fact, we got coverage to take a guy from a really, really interesting background who had no connection with the military, found a friend of mine who then passed him on to me. We took him to Germany to do it, and he helped me do a rape trial of 3 soldiers accused of beating up and raping a German civilian. And it was what a great experience. There's a guy at Portsmouth Uni who stalked me on LinkedIn, so we gave him a tour of a ship. I gave him a tour of HMS Diamond, one of our air defence platforms, and he spent a day with me in the legal office, and I gave him some work to do, actually. So we will try and do it, but we are a lot smaller than our GLD colleagues. What we would ideally like to do, stop recording, is try and get more aligned with our GLD colleagues and our Army and Air Force colleagues. And again, we're 5 years behind. So I'd like to see us try and do that, because as I've said earlier, I'm very conscious. The Navy's done a lot right. I think sexuality, I think social background, we're there. I think race, gender, we're not there. I can say, yeah, well, 10% of the naval bar is from BAME. There's only 40 of us. Do the math. So I would like to see that improve, and I think legitimising that and making the professional more, the careers officers more alive to our needs. We want to take good barristers, we want to take good solicitors in, and we want to take good guys in from as wide a background, because we're your navy, we represent you. And if we're not, a bit like the GLD, they represent you as well. And if the face of the navy isn't representative of a modern 21st century democracy, then we're doing something wrong. So it's good and bad, I think. I've answered the question. I'm not sure I have.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think I should mention here that if anyone has any questions, to pop them in the chat, and I will ask them after the next couple of questions, and we'll go through them then. But for now, Susanna, you did talk about like what a pupillage kind of was like with the traineeship with the government legal department, and I was wondering to both of you whether you knew exactly what the pupillage essentially entailed, like what it was, more like day to day, month to month kind of situation. Susanna, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Well, because once qualified, there's no difference within the GLD between the different branches of the profession. So we're quite keen to align the training experience of our trainee solicitors and our trainee barristers, with that exception that I mentioned, that the trainee barristers do spend 6 months in a set of chambers. What's quite interesting is the way we run our pupillage, of course, aligns with the Bar Standards Board requirements, and is completed after 12 months, subject to satisfactory performance and filling in your diary and all that sort of thing. But what we do is, once qualified as a GLD barrister, we maintain the parallel with our solicitor trainees by giving the qualified barristers an extra couple of 6-month postings before moving to a 3-year posting after that. So essentially, to give your qualification is recognised and you get a bit more money, and then but in order to ensure that your training experience continues in that first year of qualification, you will do another couple of postings. The way the postings tend to work, as I said, they are in 6-month slots, and we ensure that you get a mix of contentious work and non-contentious work. And so the people that run the training scheme will look at the individual and their preferences, the sort of work they're interested in, but equally the sort of work we think makes for a well-rounded government lawyer. So we think everyone should have some litigation experience, everyone should have some legislative experience, and there will be people at my level who, it's 25 years since they've last drafted a statutory instrument, or there'll be people at my level, it's 25 years since they last instructed counsel on a litigation case. But we think getting that sort of mix early on is really valuable, and so we absolutely encourage that. The chambers that we mainly send our pupils to are chambers that do government work. And so what that enables our pupils to do is get a sense of how government lawyers work closely with members of the self-employed bar. We have panel counsel, you're probably aware. So the Attorney General appoints a panel of counsel that do government work, and we instruct them on our big litigation cases, and so our pupils will get a taste of that from the other side during their pupillage. And throughout all of that, our pupils will have a pupil supervisor, obviously in accordance with the rules. They'll also have the oversight of a training principal who looks after the whole scheme, and they'll have a sponsor who is outside their immediate line, who will look after them from the minute they get offered the pupillage through to post-qualification and those first couple of postings afterwards. There's a bit of a mentor, pastoral oversight, someone to go and moan at that's outside your line management chain.
Thank you for that. Mark?
So we offer essentially a criminal law pupillage. And so when candidates are successful, we will send you to traditionally one of four, and I've just written them down actually just from memory, one of four London sets. So 23 Essex Street, 18 Red Line Court, Goldsmiths, that's where I went, although it used to be called Three Paper Buildings back in the dark ages, and one of the Bedford Rows. And I want to say 9, but I'm bound to be wrong, but it's one of the Bedford Rows. We traditionally use them very much like for exactly the same reason as Susanna's mentioned. They are traditionally the criminal law sets that have court-martial defence work. And so we have something called the Armed Forces Criminal Legal Aid Authority, AFCLA, and they have traditionally gone to those 4 chambers. So if we can get a Navy guy in there, he gets to come and watch a court-martial on someone else's dime. So he'll do first 6, he or she will do first 6 there. We'll pull them back just before the end of their first 6, and they'll do a 2-week course in Portsmouth on international law. That is the primer for second 6, and I'll come on to that in a moment. They'll then do their whatever bit of the practicing certificate. They'll then go to second 6, except they won't. We only do really second 4 in chambers. You are on your feet. You're doing prosecuting, non-defendants, or whatever it is your chambers gives you. For the other 2 months, you're doing a mix of stuff. So you'll go to Oxford for a month. So we have a bespoke course at Oxford, led by a guy called Dapo Akande and Vaughan Lowe. I don't know if he's still knocking around, but so pretty good international law experts, and they will effectively teach you to in a month, as much as you can in a month. It's a very good course. And in fact, Ian McLeod from the Foreign Office, I don't know if he's still knocking about, but Ian McLeod comes over and does a day talking about how we interface with other government departments. You go back to chambers, you do some more pupillage stuff. We'll pull you and do a course on employment law. It's only a couple of weeks, but it's to prepare you for advisory work in HR and administrative and employment law matters. And then you end your pupillage with the CPS, either in London or Hampshire. And again, the idea is it's another part of being a naval barrister that being sat in chambers won't offer you necessarily. So you leave with a heavy criminal defence focus. You've got a bit of international grounding, so that if we do say, right, you're going to NATO or, we still have an EU NAVFOR, which are both operate, so they're both kind of international law jobs that you could do early on. You at least know where the textbook, which part of the textbook to look at while we send you in first job. Or if we send you to be a caseworker doing complaints and HR and employment law matters, again, you've had at least a bit of a grounding in it. So it's a very good package. I thoroughly enjoyed my year. It was an insight into a world that I didn't think I would get to do. And I was amazed when you're in the chambers. But it's nice to come back. And a bit like what Susanna talks about, you've got your pupil supervisor in chambers. We give you a senior naval lawyer who mentors you through while you're there. And we tend to tie to someone who's been to the same chambers so that they know the personalities or they know the tone. You get to pick your chambers as well, which I found fascinating. So I went, the reason I picked Three Paper Buildings is I did a mini with them, and they'll offer that as well. And we ended up in the old Bank of England pub next to the RCJ, and I just knew I was absolutely fine. But Bedford Row has a very bookish feel to it. 18 Red Line Court feel very corporate, even though they're criminal law barristers. So I'd commend that to you, and we encourage you to go and do a mini pupillage with them before you sign on the dotted line, so that you have you feel at home, because it's a big moment, pupillage. Don't underestimate it. It's quite a hard year. We've got a question from Natalie. I'm getting used to this twin track approach of questions from Holly and questions from the team. So initially, Holly, yes, absolutely. So when you're in pupillage, and it kind of ties in with that, when you're in pupillage, that mentor figure will contact you and say, right, where do you want to go first job? So traditionally, a naval barrister will either come and work for me in advisory, so very kind of criminal law focused, with a bit of international and employment tacked on. You could go and do casework, which is all kind of complaintsy, HRE stuff. We've got a guy at NATO who came out of pupillage recently. So obviously NATO is our kind of big alliance, us and the Americans, and the European powers. So Northwood, just outside Watford, is the headquarters of NATO Maritime. And so we have a naval lawyer there advising on maritime law with his international colleagues. So yes, at the junior level, albeit caveated with, we want you to move around. So we'll want you to do a bit of everything, because later on in your career, when they come back to you and go, right, what masters do you want to do? Or how do you see your career lining up? If you want to be the senior Navy prosecutor, the Service Prosecuting Authority, we'd like you to have had experience as a junior prosecutor, because a bit like how Susanna described with the GLD, the senior prosecutor is mainly more management and strategic thinking. And, so sexual offences in the military is a big thing at the moment. It's not a big thing, sorry. How we deal with sexual offences is a big thing in the military at the moment. Lots of scrutiny of what we do. So the senior Navy guy there he's less in court, because he's liaising with the CPS, with police, with the MOD, and so because he's been that junior prosecutor, he can represent our interests more effectively later on. So the answer is, Natalie, yes, we will take that into account. But you would never in the military just be a prosecutor. You will dance about the military a bit, and you'll do a bit of international law, you'll do a bit of employment law, you'll do a bit of generic advisory stuff, a bit of defence, and then you would go off and prosecute as part of that cycle. Does that answer your question? I'm getting a thumbs up. There we go. I appear to have answered the question. Hurrah. Hurrah for the Navy.
Susanna, do you want to take on Natalie's question as well about whether you can express a preference for work and a practice area?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned early on, we really encourage and in fact require people to get a breadth of experience. So keeping that contentious, non-contentious mix going in the very early years of practice. But essentially what happens after that, this was one of the benefits of creating the government legal department out of lots of smaller teams within that were sort of freestanding within different departments, is that we can run an exercise every year, which means that when people are ready for a change or a move, they can express a preference to move elsewhere within GLD without having to go through a whole competition, advertise a job, apply for it, all that sort of thing. Now that does mean, I mean, it has to, there's always got to be a balance, because we can't have everybody expressing a preference to be the GDPR expert at the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. So we have to take account of availability and business need where our priorities lie. But we do try to encourage, to meet people's preferences. And I often, preferences within GLD can be either subject matter, someone who's got a real interest in welfare law, or someone who's got a real interest in international operational law that the MOD do to support Marc and his colleagues. Or it could also be skills based, in terms of your next move, which is what's your development need? Do you need to do some primary legislation? Do you need to work closely with a minister taking a bill through Parliament? And actually, if you're looking at it from a skills perspective, the subject matter shouldn't really matter. It's about gaining those skills. So we encourage a blend of that. And what you find is that people will settle after those first couple of years into what we call maybe a career anchor area. Now that might mean, so for example, one of my career anchors since being at the Foreign Office has been national security work. So I went from the Foreign Office to the MOD to, and then non-national security, I went to education and got my sort of drafting legislation, all that sort of thing under my belt. Then I went to the Cabinet Office, which had a bit more of a national security angle to it as well. So I've sort of bopped in and out of national security work during the course of my career. Others absolutely want to be employment lawyers through and through and never want to do anything else. We do have specialisms of commercial law and employment law where we enable people to move in and out if they wish to do that portfolio career approach, or to develop a deep specialism. And we encourage both lots of those. So if you want to be a commercial lawyer within government, then there are loads of opportunities to get deeper and deeper experience on procurement, purchasing. You can imagine there's an enormous amount of vaccine purchasing going on at the moment. So really quite important, valuable work.
We've got another question in from Sophie about what it's been like in light of the challenges of COVID with working from home.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Interesting question. What is quite interesting in the way that the COVID regulations have come together is that, in fact, to some extent, because I mean, I've got teams in the Department for Health who broadly lead on developing those regulations, but it's not just a Department for Health issue. So the closure of businesses very much involves the Treasury, very much involves the Department for Business, BEIS, and we've got legal colleagues in each of those departments. Other aspects of the regulations, such as the travel regulations, which I'm always keeping an eye on to plan my holidays, our colleagues in the Department for Transport work on closely with colleagues in the Foreign Office. So actually, one of the advantages of working from home and being able to hop on a Zoom call like this means that I'm able to scramble the relevant lawyers very quickly if we've got an issue on define what do we mean by, well, it was the Scots, wasn't it? The Scots had a problem with their definition of cafe, but if there's if we come across that sort of issue, working from home has actually proved to be quite a benefit. Other challenge, I mean, there are challenges working from home, and it will depend. Some of our junior lawyers are living in shared accommodation, as I'm sure some of you are. That can be more of a challenge. So we do try to facilitate people who are prepared to travel on public transport, facilitate use of office buildings if that helps. But certainly some of the lawyers working on COVID, because one of the challenges of that is, as you will have noticed, the data comes out. The data comes out. It comes out because it reflects reality on the ground. That's not something you can just sit back and say, well, let's take 3 or 4 weeks to work out what that data means and therefore what we need to do in terms of response to it. So there's a really strong political will to respond to the data very quickly. So not having to commute, being able to use the technology that we're now also adept at has actually helped us deliver the work, probably at some cost to our colleagues. I mean, I'm afraid to say colleagues have been working through the night sometimes to draft these things, but certainly there have been benefits of working from home on that. I'm just worried about the longer term effects of not seeing each other face to face often enough, and I think corporately we will be working very hard to support colleagues during these winter months, which will be even more challenging than when we had lovely weather back in April and May. Hope that gives a bit of a flavour of what it's like to work from home in GLD.
Thank you. Marc, have you had any particular or different?
Oh, I've had loads. So I've only had one kid burst into the room moment, which is, I think I was describing this to some of you before the the rest of you joined, which was when my 5-year-old ran in just as we were about to lock up a sailor for doing something pretty naughty. And she ran in, winked at him, gave him a thumbs up, which is unfortunate because we just sent him to prison. So I've only had one kind of comedy moment. I quite like working from home because I always try and make sure that at least a couple of members of my team are doing the longer term projects. So we're doing a massive project at the moment to support the carriers because that's the Navy's big thing, and how we provide legal support to their deployment, to Queen Elizabeth's deployment next year. That's a big bit of work for one lawyer because there's all sorts of legal issues. It's quite academic. It feels like a dissertation. It certainly looks like it from what he sent me so far. And so the ability to say to him, right, go home, lock yourself in his homeschooling. Whoa, horrible. I know more about the Saxons than I ever need to know, Susanna. In a way, it's been an advantage because the attraction and that mentality of you must go in, you must be seen to go in and log on at a certain time and work till a certain end point has gone. We took the decision quite early that my team of 6, we would have one lawyer in an office during the working day, which for the Navy's kind of 8 till 4 were a bit weird, just because we like to be different. So at 8 till 4, Monday to Friday, I will have a lawyer in either Portsmouth, Plymouth or Scotland. Now, the reason for that is, if you're like Susanna, much of what we deal with is, and I'm not trying to be ridiculous and go, well, I can't tell you it's all top secret, that there are certain things that are classified in government. And so if there's something involving a nuclear submarine, I have to go in. I absolutely have to go in because it's a matter of national security, and I can't even talk about the name of the boat over my normal Nokia phone or whatever. I have to go in the office. And that's been the challenge. It's been prioritizing who goes in to deal with what bit of classified work. And it'll be the same in a company. If you've got proprietary, you've got IP issues, you're not going to talk about that over Zoom with a window open during a heat wave. You're going to have to go in. If you work for Dyson or, I don't know, a tech company, they are very guarded about this stuff and the way the Navy secrets or the foreign audit's doing. So now that system has been quite hard. At a personal level, I love it. I just make sure that my sneaky beaky stuff is done on it. So the weekend was interesting because I was duty lawyer. So we go from, and you can almost see the bloody tanker from my house in Portsmouth. So I had to go in clearly there. Now we've got a lawyer with the Special Forces. He dealt with most of it. I dealt with the disciplinary aspects and what happens to the military while they're involved in that. I had to go in for that, clearly. So that side of it it's just a balancing act. The Navy generally has had a really interesting COVID, and I'm not belying the fact that 50,000 people died. It's tragic, but the Navy has had both the good and bad COVID, because the first thing they did is they convened a meeting with about 50 people in an airtight room, all breathing each other's germs, and it wasn't until the doctor kind of screamed at us all to socially distance, stuff like that. So there was a kind of macho alpha male attitude, which when they calmed down, they adopted a much better model. The challenges are there though, and we take the advice from our government, our other government departments, so the NHS and MOD and the Foreign Office are the big three that I deal with, and we have problems. So the air bridge, so we've got a big base in Bahrain. It's called the UKMCC, UK Maritime Component Commander in Bahrain, because the Gulf is an area of interest. We've got a staff out there headed by a senior officer who has a lawyer, has a doctor, has a team of people. And if you're told you're going away for 9 months, that's a long time. If you're told, well, it's 9 months, but we're not sure we can fly you home because all the airports are closed and the RAF aren't sure that they're able to fly you in. And so that was a big problem. We had to manage a whole load of issues stemming from that and getting them out there. Because, you go out there, do you quarantine before you board the aircraft? Do you quarantine after you board the aircraft? Do we test you? Do we not test you? That's been a challenge. And moving ships around. So again, I talked about the big exercise we've just done in Scotland. The carrier is 1,000 people. A smaller vessel, a frigate or destroyer, a warship basically, has 250 people. Do we order them to isolate? Can I order them to isolate? Is there a reason why they should isolate? And so all of that stuff, with the civilian guidance as well, I find it fascinating. I find it intellectually very challenging and fun. However, as a lawyer, that sounds very academic. We can't ignore the fact that a lot of people, some people on this call might have lost loved ones or might have had the disease, and that's pretty unpleasant. And you're balancing that, you're balancing the challenges of the home environment with, in Susanna's case, the need to push out guidance to the country. In my case, the guidance to unlock whatever it is that we're stumbling over, to make sure that the Navy can do its output, which is to defend the interests of the UK. So it's been rewarding, but it hasn't been without its challenges, Holly. It's been an interesting time for all of us.
Oh, thank you for that. I do have a couple of private questions that have been sent through to me. First of all is, do you know how many barristers, sorry, not how many, do you know many barristers who have come into the employed bar and then moved back to the self-employed bar, and is this very common? So Marc, if you want to take that one.
So in the Navy, yes, it is. In fact, across the armed forces, it is. So the Navy are pure barristers. The Army and the Air Force, as I've said, have sisters and barristers. Because the Navy train you to be a criminal barrister, I guess the only drawback, the only challenge you would have if you left is a Chambers might be reluctant to take you on because you've not had years of building up contacts with solicitors. It is not unheard of. We've had a few. There's a guy, in fact, we've had quite a few. We've had a few go kind of into shipping, so they've either taken their international law masters from a grateful government, said thank you very much, and gone to probably double their earnings, but double the workload. At the employed bar, doing maritime law, we've had quite a few go into private practice doing criminal defence. We have had a few go across to the CPS actually, because from military prosecuting to civilian prosecuting, there aren't many differences. So I know the CPS is the employed bar, but it's quite an it seems to be quite a revolving door at the moment. So yes is the answer, but again, I'm part of a very small organisation that's only 40 strong, so 3 or 4 in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Susanna, what about the government legal department?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. Certainly, some of our pupils, whilst they know full well that they're not going to have a lifetime of advocacy if they stay within GLD, sometimes I think the lure of that advocacy draws them back to the self-employed bar. But on the whole, I mean, I can, probably think of colleagues over the course of my career, only a handful that have gone back and made a success of it.
Thank you. We've got another question. This one's directed at Susanna. I don't want to overstep to ask your personal political opinion, but have you found yourself or your colleagues have problems with the work that you're doing because the government in power has opposing political views to yourself? Do you find people leaving the government legal department when a party they don't like comes into power?
I think it's instilled in us quite early on, and it's part of, what you're signing up to when you join the civil service, that it is absolutely a fundamental value that we are impartial in the advice that we give to the government of the day, and therefore we don't adopt personal positions in relation to the policies that we're working on. If colleagues get to a position where they absolutely cannot, in all conscience, continue their work because their personal political opinions are so strong, then that's a matter for them. It happens. I don't know anyone. I'm trying to think if I know anyone who's left for those political, because you know what you're signing up for, and it's as legal professionals as well, of course, absolutely used to our commitment and our professional duty to our clients, regardless of what we think of them personally. And it's just the same within government. And I think it's really important aspect of the civil service and of the government legal profession that the permanent nature of the UK civil service, which means we will continue to serve the government of the day regardless of their political makeup, is one of the really, it's something I feel very strongly about from a UK constitutional perspective. I think it's really important, and I think that's a great safeguard to our fellow citizens, that the permanent civil service maintains that impartiality and keeps our personal political opinions to ourselves, because it doesn't mean we don't have our personal political opinions, but my friends have got very used to knowing where to draw the line about talking about politics. And what's quite interesting if you look at it from a lawyer's perspective, of course, in private practice, particularly in private practice at the self-employed bar, your mates that you're down the pub with wouldn't have a clue who your client was that you were representing in court that day. Every time I go out with my friends, they know who my client is, and therefore my duties of confidentiality towards my client, before I even get on to civil service values and civil service rules and maintain professional duties kick in very early on, because everyone knows who my client is. That's part of the interest for me, to work on all sides of the coin. So it's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in actually, Holly, actually, because it's a question I faced earlier on in my career than now, actually. And I joined when we were fighting Tony Blair's wars. If you want to be glib, we were fighting Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, I had pretty strong views as a student about one of them, and I then found myself as a lawyer in the other one. Now, we could take a vote on what you all thought about the Iraq War or the Afghan War, and do you know what? I had a view, but it didn't matter, because my job out there was to provide advice on the spot to people who are making decisions that affects the lives of Afghans, our allies, British soldiers. I had a duty to make sure that the rule of law was maintained, and advise my commander where he was running risk about that. And one of my first days was that we lost a soldier, and I had to talk to David. I had to advise my boss. I had to brief the Prime Minister. I then had to advise my boss again after his meeting with the Prime Minister. And you just, Susanna's right. Your legal skills kick in quite quickly. I work for a hugely expensive organisation. We spend billions on shiny bits of things that scoot around the country or the world, doing what the government today asks us to do. I might have a view on spending £1.5 billion on a warship, and buying 6 of them, because we quite like to have 6 of them. Thank you very much, please, Mr. Treasury. But that's irrelevant. The military very often are asked to do rather odd and unpleasant things. It's not my job to give Jones's private view. I'm a chap in his mid-30s who's employed to advise my client, the commanding officer of whatever action's going on, where he's running risk, what the legal requirements are, and also what the advice from Whitehall is. And you just have to park it in the same way that if your company's doing something illegal, then you have a problem. But if it's doing something that you disagree with, well, frankly, you're being paid the dime. You have to swallow your private views. They may be wrong, they may be right, to deliver for your company. And so there's a different. If the military was doing something unlawful, then as legal advisors we are in a difficult position. But if you are advising on something and you just disagree with his course of action, well, sorry, I have to. That's not my call. If I have a problem with that, I can resign my commission, stand for Parliament, and represent the other side. And I probably sound quite flippant about that. I'm not. It is something that we face. I have views on everything the military does because I'm an opinionated bloke. But that's not. A different government might have a different view about whether we need 4 aircraft carriers, no aircraft carriers, 1 aircraft carrier. It's fine. Your professional duty kicks in very early, though, and in the same way that if you're defending someone at the self-employed bar who's pretty unpleasant, you still do your best for your client, I would hope, because that's what our ethical code of conduct makes us do, frankly.
Well, thank you for that. I'm conscious that we're coming up to 8:30, so I think that as our last question, I will go for, what advice would you give to those students that are aspiring to go to the employed bar? Susanna, if we want to come back to you for that one.
Yeah, of course. So if you're thinking of going straight to the employed bar, either for pupillage or after pupillage, find out as much as possible about the range of different opportunities there are at the employed bar. Obviously, you've heard from 2 public sector lawyers today, and of course I would say come to GLD because it's absolutely brilliant, and keep an eye out for our pupillage competitions that are launched every summer, and try to find friends who are within the particular organisations that that you're interested in. But as I say, from an employed bar perspective, try to get an overview of the different options that are available, because I suspect there are as many different options at the employed bar as there are in other areas of walk. I was quite interested recently, I did some work with the Bar Council a few years ago, you know, and did sort of co-presenting with someone who was a company secretary and, you know, general counsel to a board. Very interesting, very different sort of split of responsibilities that you get in those sorts of more commercial and corporate areas, particularly that company secretary angle that often the general counsel has. I suppose the other point about general counsel, and you'll hear this through other events that you do, I'm sure, but they tend to have a much more commissioning role rather than being responsible for all the legal advice themselves. And again, that's a very different a different skill set and a different interest. So I would do lots of research about the different opportunities that are available. And then when you've done all of that and concluded that either the GLD or the Naval Prosecuting Authority is the best place, then come back and join us.
Thank you for that. And Mark, what about your parting advice?
Network, network, network. So this is why I think this is fantastic, because I like to talk for an hour and a half, and I'm a barrister, so that's what we do. But network, 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 and anything you can do, talk to people. You don't have to, you know, this is not a, you know, you don't have to formally apply, just talk to someone. I'm more than happy for any of the people on this evening to LinkedIn stalk me and send me a quick, you know, quick message with what's it like. I will happily do that. Oh, I've just got a text. You know, happily do that. Talk to friends, find out whether the culture of the organization, what's the job, what's the culture of the organization, is it for you? Because the, you know, parts of the Navy, you know, parts of what the naval lawyer does, I can see would repel some of you, would attract some of you. The GLD, some of you might find an aspect of it attractive or unattractive, but you won't know unless you reach out. You know, and you know, I've absolutely, you know, my team of 6 have said, if you ever get a sniff from a university, or you're invited to judge a mock trial, or you're invited to, you know, someone wants a ship's visit, do it, because it's the only way that, frankly, I'll you know, someone will backfill me if I get promoted or move on. And you know, Susanna's team will need fresh blood, so it's the only way that we, you know, a naval lawyer was very kind enough to give me some of his time when I was on BBC back in the dark ages. So. I feel, you know, I think we're very good in the legal sector of doing that, though, of encouraging that. So network, stuff like this, LinkedIn stalking, go to a careers office, go to a GLD internship, whatever it is. Absolutely, more than happy though for anybody who's been on this evening's call to contact me in private.
Oh, thank you for that, and thank you both so much for tonight. It's been absolutely incredible. You've given some great advice and explained everything. Just before we go, I would like to mention the next in-state event as a nice little plug. It's the finance teams event coming up on the 31st, and they've got 4 speakers who have worked at KPMG, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Deloitte, and all that coming up on the 31st. So please sign up, please come along. But for tonight, thank you so much for coming. And you are all allowed to leave now.
Thank you, Holly. Really interesting, really good to, well done for organising it.
Thank you. I hope you both have a lovely evening. And I'll see you later.
Will do. I'll get tweeting, I guess.
Thank you.